We've reflected on the book of Isaiah many times in the past liturgical year. That vision he had that one day there would be a universal peace flowing out of Jerusalem to the whole world, when war would be no more, when swords would be beaten into plowshares. The word of the Lord has expanded out from Jerusalem thanks to the Christ, but the final victory of good over evil has not come, although we are certain that it will come, probably when we least expect it. But today I would like to reflect on St. Paul's letter to the Romans that we had, because it applies to the here and now, the battle we're in our own lives, in our own cultures, in our own spiritual struggles. And he says, be prepared, be awake, and he tells us what not to do. He says, don't participate in orgies and in drunkenness. Do not have yourselves involved with promiscuity and lust. Don't be taken up in rivalries and in jealousies and envies. Now, the letter to the Romans was written to a Christian community growing at the heart of the empire. Militarily and politically, Rome was at its peak, and it created a universal peace due to force of their military imposed on all of the nations around the Mediterranean world. But in the city itself, there was monumental moral corruption. The equestrian and senatorial classes often would have orgies of sexual promiscuity and drunkenness. They would eat and drink till they couldn't eat or drink anymore. Then they would go off to the vomitorium, cleanse themselves, and go back and eat and drink more and have sex with everybody at the party. And they were the upper class, the elite, the educated, totally corrupt in their hearts, minds, and souls. Sometimes you'll see moralists say the fall of the Roman Empire took place because of moral corruption. Well, yes, but it took another 300 years. So that is something that took its toll over time. But all of the Christians in that city were aware of that. They were not involved with that. Half of the Roman Christians were Jewish, and so they had a sense of their dignity, of what sexuality should be about, from their long history of revelation, the law and the prophets of Israel. And the new Gentile converts, they were repulsed by lifestyles that perhaps once they participated in, and they wanted a new way of life, of clear thinking and decent behavior. But St. Paul nevertheless gave a warning for them and a warning for all the generations to come. Now, in our big cities, there are anonymous sex clubs where people are consumed by their own passions, both in the gay and the heterosexual communities, and they lose so much because they harden their hearts and they've lost a sense of their own dignity and what their own procreative powers are all about. And then St. Paul says, don't live your lives in promiscuity and lust. Promiscuity is a little different from orgies. You go from one person after another person, after another person, after another person. And along the way, you've forgotten what it means to be a real man, a real woman. I remember 10 or 12 years ago when the hooking up culture was just getting launched around college campuses, and I saw one college co-ed say, well, this is the time we do this sort of thing. When else are we going to have time to do it in our lives? I said, well, never. How many people have ruined their lives in those situations? And of course, spring break, where there's suddenly a license to take as many drugs as you want, have as much alcohol as you want, and have sexual intercourse with strangers wherever they may be. I know one tragic case where there was a freshman in college, and he wanted to go on spring break with the classmates to Florida. And the mother didn't want him to go. The father said, well, he's got to go sometime. And this was a decent young man. Well, he went to a party. It was an overcrowded apartment. And he was accidentally pushed off a balcony and killed. So entering those situations is life-threatening on multiple levels. And it is soul-disrupting. So St. Paul would say, don't follow a life of promiscuity. It's much better to love one person in 1,000 different ways rather than trying to love 1,000 different people in the same old way. Don't follow that type of life with your God-given human sexuality. A tremendous challenge in every culture, but especially in the materialistic cultures of the world today, in which we're bombarded by images, thoughts, and values which have no real value. But Christians mainly are able to somewhat avoid that. Although in every parish, there are people that seem like pillars of society that are leading secret lives which are totally opposite to the teachings of the church on human sexuality and fidelity in marriage, etc. To those people, I say, start anew, get to the sacrament of reconciliation, beg God to overcome those weaknesses before it's too late for you, your family, and your friends. But there is something that St. Paul says that unfortunately is too much a part of every believing community. Jealousy, envy, rivalry that comes up over and over again and saps our capacity as followers of Jesus to live lives of joy and at peace with one another, let alone peace with the world that Isaiah longed for. All of a sudden, somebody gets on a liturgical committee that you don't like the way they think the liturgy should be run, or someone else is helping out with the maintenance and has a fight with somebody else who says, oh, this painting should be done this way rather than that way. And it's been that way since the first century all the way to the 21st century. That's why St. Paul, I always bring up, in his letter to the Philippians, two of his favorite women, Euodia and Syntyche, they were fighting like cats and dogs for some reason. He said, they're both saints. Their names are written in the book of life. Please have them stop fighting. Both of them have helped me so much. And so what was happening in Philippi happens over and over in all types of church organizations. But there's also another element. When St. Paul would condemn orgies, drunkenness, promiscuity, etc., he also would be offering the forgiveness of God to all those caught up in those type of lifestyles, to have courage to follow the way of loving that Jesus taught. And as the Christian community, we have that task, not to condemn people for their damnable actions, but to remind them that their actions are damnable, but there is a different way of life that's available to them. Now, purity and chastity never ever has killed anyone. Promiscuity has killed millions every single year. And not only physically killed people, but have slain families, disrupted friendships, led to all types of conflict that is not only soul-sapping, but also sapping the human community of its own dignity. So certainly we have a path that's difficult to follow and impossible without the grace of God. But in this Advent season, as we prepare for Christmas, we take our hearts, minds, and souls and say, make us ready to really receive the Christ. We're all going to be doing some sort of penance because we all know our own faults, our own weaknesses. And the Lord knows them too, but loves us anyway. We have to allow that love to transform us into more and more holy human beings with forgiving hearts that can be truly lights to the world that is all so darkened.